Good afternoon, everybody. Today I wanted to talk about a question that comes up a lot. We've done videos on it before, but I think it's always beneficial to reinforce these things. People will often say, what's better to do with an EB-5? Is it better to do adjustment of status or consular processing? These two processes are very different. The requirements actually differ quite a bit too, and it's hard to make broad generalizations. But I agreed with my marketing guy to do this video, so let's try to make the best we can about this discussion, understanding that each individual situation is unique and you probably should speak with an experienced attorney before making a final decision. In any case, what do we think is better, adjustment or consular processing? So there's a lot of factors you need to take into account before making a final decision. For example, what's your home country? Where are you from? If you're from a country where we know from experience and current processing times that there are long wait times there for immigrant visa processing, that might be a reason why we would discourage consular processing. Even in a country such as Canada, for whatever reason, the US consulate in Montreal is taking forever to schedule people for EB-5 interviews. I'm not sure what that's about, why that is, but it's been like that for several years. So most of our Canadian clients, we say, look, unless you're willing to wait, probably 2 years after you get the approval, we think you should come to the US and adjust status. That also is true for countries where there might be problems with the embassy. For example, in Russia, the US embassy has not been working in Moscow for quite a few years now. They're sending all the applicants to Warsaw. Warsaw is not a great place to be if you're Russian. If you know anything about history, the Poles and the Russians have not historically always gotten along well. That's not relevant to our discussion for this topic, but it still is provides a background to some of the underlying tensions that exist at the US consulate in Warsaw right now and some of the problems that exist for Russian investors. We've noticed there, for example, that almost every Russian investor they're sending for administrative processing, for secondary review, even if they're coming in with an approved EB-5, and there shouldn't be any reason to have additional checks on that investor. So again, those kind of issues might apply to certain nationalities and certain locations and posts abroad. So that's just something we need to keep in mind dealing with individuals from certain countries. Another more relevant reason why you might not consider consular processing and might do adjustment of status is if you have citizenship from one of the 75 countries for which immigrant visa processing was suspended earlier this year in 2026. So the Trump administration announced that 75 countries, their citizens were temporarily being suspended from receiving immigrant visas. Now you think about that, that's a lot of countries. That's almost 50% of all the countries in the globe. So that's quite a few people that were affected by this decision. As a result of it, if you're one of those 75 countries, you're not able to get your immigrant visa at the embassy. However, you are able to adjust status. So assuming you have some other visa, tourist visa, student visa, something like that, you're able nonetheless to come on that temporary visa and then adjust status to the EB-5. And even if you don't have one of those visas, there's nothing keeping you from going out to get an E2, for example. You come to the US on the E2, you can file for your EB-5 and then file for the adjustment of status here. So that 75 country ban is certainly an inconvenience for a lot of people, but there are some workarounds. Having said all this, it sounds like I'm just all negative about going to the embassy for an interview. I don't necessarily want to sound like that. As you can tell, there are a number of disadvantages of going to the embassy. The thing is, when you get the approval from USCIS, when you go to the State Department and the embassy, that's a different government agency. And the funny thing is, most people, including myself until I started doing this, would think, okay, the US government is one entity. If one agency approves my case, the other agency should just kind of take them at their word and just automatically approve it. And that's not necessarily the case. The State Department has kind of their own requirements for issuing a visa, and those requirements differ from the criteria the Immigration Service, USCIS, looks at when adjudicating an EB-5. So even though USCIS might get the approval, the final word, at least for purposes of issuing the visa, final word is up to the State Department and the people at the embassy there. So there is always an extra heightened degree of risk when you're going to the State Department because they might see something they don't like. They can always put you in administrative processing that might delay the process of getting the visa. There's a lot of things that always could come up. With EB-5, the vast majority really have no problems when they go to the embassy. But again, a lot depends on your circumstances, your immigration history, the country you're from, and what location you'll be going through the interview. So I wouldn't say necessarily that going to the consulate and having an interview is always bad, but in some cases, you might even be able to get your visa and green card faster going through the embassy than you could by adjusting status here. Again, it depends what country you're from, the wait times at the embassy, etc. So all these factors need to be taken into account when you're trying to make a final decision on these things. We advise to speak to an experienced EB-5 attorney, not just any immigration attorney, but an EB-5 attorney that's had at least, my goodness, at least 10 years of experience or longer to discuss these issues and come up with an effective strategy for you and your family. Again, my name's Charles Raether. I look forward to speaking with you in the near future to help you plot your plan for coming to the United States.